Each and every one of you, hope you've had a good afternoon. I want to welcome you to our services here at Petersville tonight for the first night of our melting pot. I want to give anyone at this time that's here tonight that did not have an opportunity to partake of the Lord's Supper, if you'll go through the door to my right at this time while I'm making announcements, and you can be served, and then if you can come back in, and we will have a short devotional, and then we'll be dismissed to go to our classes. I want to remind you again of the class selections that we have. To get my better eyes on. In the auditorium, the Gospel in Alabama. Wayne Kilpatrick will be here in a couple of weeks. Brother Lewis is pinch hitting for him. So Brother Lewis will be here in the auditorium. Austin Oakley will be teaching a class in the, I think it's room 10, up the ramp back to my left from Peter to Petersville. And then Adam will be teaching through singing in the fellowship hall. So I hope that you'll pick which one that you want to go to. If you want to try different ones over the next few weeks, that is entirely up to you, but we want you to take part in these different classes. We want to remember Anita and Donna that both come forward this morning requesting prayers, so please do remember these in your prayers. I know the group that went to McGee Farm had a good time today. We appreciate Brad and Courtney organizing that. Brent will be taking our teens to Sayers at Killen, so they'll be leaving after our devotional. Wish them safe travel as they go tonight. Again, we've got a group going to disaster relief in Nashville to work on Tuesday. You'll be leaving at 6 a.m., so be sure and be here, be ready to go. We'll begin working at 9 to 1, and then you'll be back that afternoon later. So I hope that we have a good number to go. Again, there were some that gave me some money this morning. We'd like to take an additional donation up there when we go to work. If you want to help with this, please see me. Please see one of the elders or see Gary Crow. You can make that check to disaster relief, or you can make it to Petersville. Either one, and we'll get that took up there. Also, I made an announcement from Kim Mays. We have a team that will be walking to defeat ALS on Saturday, October the 27th. If you'd like to donate to our team, to go online to ALS Huntsville Walk. Go to our team name, Mike Wilson. If you'd rather give the donation to Kim, you can, and she'll take that with her. And this is in honor of her brother, Mike, who passed away last December. So as I said this morning, let's rally around Kim and her group and help them in any way that we possibly can. There's several different groups that needed to meet tonight following our services. Love Where You Live groups 1 and 7. Also groups 2 and 12 needed to meet for a few minutes. So be sure and make note of that. And groups 4 and 10 are planning a fellowship meal. You're having soups next Sunday morning. Be sure and sign the list up front as far as what you can bring on that. Talked to Jim Godey a little bit earlier. He's just bubbling over. Erica and Mark are doing good. The baby's doing good. So we want to continue to remember Jim and Lori as they're away from us. Continue to remember all the others that are on our sick list. Travis Creasy. Be sure and remember him and his family. Also, Tristan Lash had some surgery this week. I talked to Angela on Friday. As far as I know, everything went well. We want to continue to remember him also in our prayers. This time, I'm going to turn it over to John.
Please mark as a song of invitation 577. 577, We Bow Down, will be our invitation song following the devotional thought. And then before, we'll sing Shine, Jesus, Shine, 290. Sing both verses of this song, please. 290. Let's stand and sing this song, please. Lord, the light of your love is shining in the midst of the dark, is shining. Jesus, light of the world, shine upon us.
Good evening. Just very quickly, in way of a devotional thought tonight, we looked at Psalm 124 this morning, and it talked about where our help comes from, among other thoughts. Verse 8 says, "Our help is in the name of the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth." And that's not the only place in the Bible, especially in Psalms, where it says that our help doesn't just come from God, but it specifically says, in the name of the Lord. The name of the Lord is a strong tower. The righteous run into it, and they are saved. The name of the Lord is important. In fact, the name of the Lord is so important that one of the 10 commandments of all the rules that God could set out and all the rules that are important for us to follow, one of the 10 commandments for the Israelites was, do not take the name of the Lord in vain. I wanted to think for a minute, since we're focusing on the name of the Lord, and since that commandment says, do not take the name of the Lord in vain, and it was obviously so important in ancient Israel that they actually would not even pronounce the word Yahweh in the Old Testament times. And even to this day, if you are reading a Jewish rabbi or a devout Orthodox Jewish person write about spiritual things, when they write the word God, they will put capital G dash D. They won't even write the full word, the 3-letter word God, because they feel like it is so sacred and important that they won't even pronounce it or write it out, because they were afraid of taking the name of the Lord in vain. What does it mean, or what are some examples of ways to take the name of the Lord in vain? I wanted to talk about these tonight to give you 3 ideas from Leviticus chapter 19 and from Romans chapter 2. Now the outline specifically comes from Cecil May Jr. He did a good job of this. 3 examples from Scripture on how people misuse God's name, and I want you to listen to these and ask yourself, am I guilty in one way or another of taking the name of the Lord in vain in one of these 3 ways? We begin in Leviticus chapter 19 and verse 12, and there's actually 2 listed here that Cecil brings out. He says, "You shall not swear by my name falsely, or take an oath by my name falsely, and so profane the name of your God. I am the Lord." I liked the outline here because they all start with the same letter. The first thing he talks about is perjury. Perjury, we know, is when you sit on the witness stand in court and you tell a lie. But in this case, taking the name of the Lord in vain is perjury when we swear falsely, or when we take out an oath and we use God to verify our oath. And it's kind of like when we make a promise. And Jesus said, don't even make an oath at all. Just let your yes be yes and your no be no. Be trustworthy. Because there were people who were too busy saying, well, if you say you promise, then you may not keep that promise. But if you say, I swear on this, or I swear on that, well, then maybe you'll keep your word. Just keep your word. But it was a serious offense. It was showing dishonor to God to take an oath and say, in God's name, I will do this. Because then if you don't fulfill that promise, if you don't keep that promise, that's showing ultimate disrespect to God and to His name, to say, well, I guess I won't really worry about doing that, even though I took it in the name of God. So perjury is the first thing he talks about. Profanity is the second. We know what profanity is. We know to use profanity is to say words that are debased, that are vulgar. But really the word profane means to treat lightly something that is sacred. The name of God is sacred. And so to use it as a byword, to say, oh my God, just as an exclamation, or just as a byword or a surprised statement, or to use it to curse someone else, is to treat a holy name with disrespect. So typically we can misuse God's name by swearing falsely. I swear to God is something that would be inappropriate for us to use in our language. Profanity would be the second way, when we use it as a byword or an exclamation to make a statement. And then finally, in Romans chapter 2 and verse 24, we read another way where it speaks of the word of God is being blasphemed, or the name of God is being blasphemed among you. The third and final way is a perverse lifestyle. So we have perjury, profanity, and a perverse lifestyle. What we mean by perverse is claiming to wear God's name, claiming the name or a title of a Christian, but then going out and living against his will and living in such a way that in Romans chapter 2 and verse 24 it says, other people are looking at you and they are taking God's name in vain because they are blaspheming God's name because of your example in their life. And so that's the third way that we can misuse or mistreat God's name. If Psalm 124 says that our trust or our help is in the name of the Lord, then we have to treat that with respect in how we speak, in how we think about God and His name, and also in how we act when we wear the name of God. It said that Alexander the Great, as he was a general in the Greek army, was reprimanding a young soldier for dereliction of duty, not doing his job well. And so as he was about to reprimand him, he started by asking for the young soldier's name. And the young soldier replied, "Alexander, sir." That got Alexander the Great's attention, and he said, "You either need to change your name or change your ways." And so we have to think about the name that we wear and the honor that comes along with it. Tonight, if you wear the name of Christ, you must follow Christ, and you have to heed His will in your life. We'll sing this invitation song, and if there's anything that we can do for you tonight, we ask you to come forward while we stand and while we sing.
Help us as a family here at Petersville that we could do everything we can to help one another grow closer to you each and every day so that we truly can be the kind of people that you want us to be. I know Larry feels that same way. appreciate his humble heart to come forward and to ask for prayers and thoughts as he struggles with his temper and with other things that he'd like to get under control. Just help him to be a better example to those around him and to remember to always try to be like Jesus. Help us to be that city set on a hill so that we can shine like stars in the night sky. Forgive us when we fall and give us the strength to stand and try again. And it's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen. Teenagers, y'all have a good night.
Yeah, yep. She'll do that for sure. Let me first apologize for myself. Brother Kilpatrick is going to come and talk about the church in Lauderdale County. And I'm very interested in that. We had Brother Kilpatrick here 10 years ago, Bob, something like that. And he did that subject, and I was expecting him to, with all of this stuff he had, to write a book. If he's written it, I don't know it. But let's encourage him when he gets here to write that stuff down and get it published so that, and if he's got one already done, I sure want a copy of it. Because the last copy I have of a church book around Lauderdale County was written by John Cox in about 1948, if my memory's close to in gear. The other reason that I am interested in that class is I know he's going to talk about one of my favorite folks, and that's T.B. Larimore. And the reason I am interested in T.B. Larimore, he married my grandparents, Lewis and Irma Blaylock. Lewis Blaylock was from here. Irma Griffith was from Johnstown, Pennsylvania. My great-grandfather was named Kavode Griffith, and he was a coal miner in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. And one of the coal cars ran over him down in the mine and cut his left arm off. And so he could no longer be a coal miner. So he moved here to Lauderdale County and homesteaded 120 acres over on Church Road. And if you know Church Road, when you leave here and go down Church Road, cross the railroad track, and there's a woods on the right-hand side of the road. That started my grandfather's property, and it goes down to that road that cuts back and goes through Industrial Park. That green house up on the hill was where the old homestead was, and it was out of logs, and it was a dog trot affair to start with. Had 2 rooms, one on the right and one on the left, and a hallway down the middle. That had been closed in, and so I don't remember when it wasn't. They built a lean-to on the back and put a dining room and kitchen back there. And I spent the winter that I was 5 years old with my grandmother and grandfather there on that property. And my mother was teaching school at Gilbert. My brother was already in school. And so my dad would drop me off there in the mornings, and I'd help my grandfather milk cows, and then we'd take the milk to town. We'd come back, and before Daddy picked me up in the afternoon, we'd milk those cows again. And I could milk cows when I was 5. And I probably couldn't do it today because it's been so long since I've done that. But I have a lot of memories about Mars Hill Church. We moved from Grassy when I was about 3 years old. My grandfather in North Island, up in Grassy, owned 120 acres up there, and he'd come from over around Anniston, and he was originally from around Carrollton, Georgia. And on his way to North Alabama, he stopped in around Double Springs and married a gal from down there, also an Irish girl. And anyway, he owned 120 acres up in Grassy, and my father had started out sharecropping his place. And when I was born and was about 3 years old, I had a brother that was 2 years older, and he threw my daddy off the sharecropping deal, and Daddy had to move. And he had no place to go and no job. And we wound up down in St. Florine with the Blaylocks. And some of my first memories are there. And then we moved to Lexington, and then back down to Mars Hill to the old Cackerman place. If you go down Mars Hill Road from Mars Hill School out to the old Jackson Highway, there's a section in there that has a double back 90-degree turn. Turns left and then back right. We lived up on the hill there by the Cackermans. The Cackerman was down on the level ground, and there was a creek on both sides of that property. And my brother and I didn't swim in them, but we played in the creeks, and we had got a lot of memories from there. Then my mother and Dad bought a place out on County Road 16. Now it was mud road in those days, and the name is right. It was a muddy road all of the time, seemed like. But anyway, we went to Mars Hill to church when he lived on the Cackerman place, and when I went out and worked with my grandfather from the time I was 7 or 8 years old, we'd go out there and work the summertime with him. And we had always gone to Mars Hill to church. And T.B. Larimore, of course, was one of the first guys that started that place. And my grandparents were the first ones married in the old church building that's still standing there today. I have a lot of memories about that church building. And it's there on beside the creek, and the windows swing out. You just unlatch them, and they swing out. And the wasps came in, and there was no air conditioning. It was hot in the summertime, and it was cold in the winter. And but it was a good place, and we really enjoyed it. Hibbett, and his name went out the window, his first name. Rufus, wasn't that his name? Yeah, they had to wound up with, he was a coach at Coffee, and then he started the Hibbett and Sons, yeah. And, but anyway, he led the singing there for big meetings and on Sundays. And I can remember when I was about 5 years old, him doing that. But anyway, that's part of the background for the reason I want to hear Kilpatrick and the Lauderdale County Church of Christ. If I may be wrong, but if the last count I had on numbers of churches in Lauderdale County was 57. That's a lot of churches. If you go to South Alabama, there may be 2 or 3 in a county down there. We spent about 20 years out of our time in the military. Well, it wasn't that long, about 10, at Fort Rucker. And then we retired there, built our retirement home, and was there for another 13, 14 years. And so there was 2 churches in Enterprise. There was one in Elba. There was one in Coffee Springs. There was one in Geneva. There was one in Hartford. And you know, that's it. Daleville had one. Ozark had one. We live in a county where, and I think that, don't get your rocks out and start throwing them, okay? One of the things that's wrong with having 57 congregations of the Lord's Church in Lauderdale County is simply this. If people get tired or angry or whatever with the church they're in, they just move. They don't stay to solve the problem, they just move. Okay? And I'm not throwing rocks, I'm just saying that causes a lot of dissension in the church in Lauderdale County. If you've ever been where there's not a large number of churches and you don't have that opportunity, you want to leave that church you're in, you might have to drive 50 miles. Go to South Alabama. You get down in the Wiregrass, and that's exactly what you run into. And so it behooves each one to, if they have a problem, to get it out in the open, get it out quick, and solve the problem for the church's sake and for the Lord's sake. Well, I have a vested interest, as you probably have already guessed from what I've said, with Wayne Kilpatrick coming and doing this class. The reason I'm apologizing is because I don't know where he's going to pick up and where he's going to start, okay? I'm going to do a broad brush background tonight and next Sunday night of the church in the Bible. And it won't go much past I won't go past the first century. The only way I'll go past the first century is from personal experience talking to some other folks about the church worldwide. And I'll get that one out of the way right now. When we were in Leavenworth, Kansas, the preacher there was a guy named David George. And we moved to Enterprise. Guess what the preacher was down there? George Merritt. So I had a little trouble conversing for a month or two with George Merritt because I was thinking David George. But anyway, David George, when he was a young man, his dad was a big timber guy out in the state of Washington. And he'd gone to Bear Valley to school of preaching in Colorado, Denver. And good preacher, really was. didn't enjoy what he did later on. It was wrong and bad. But anyway, he was a good preacher when we were in Leavenworth. Was talking to him. In fact, I helped him work on an experimental airplane that he built. And I helped him put the wings on and the engine in and the landing gear on it. But anyway, when he was a young man, or young kid, really, his daddy had a Navion aircraft. It's a low-wing, single-engine, four-place aircraft. They took the two back seats out of the aircraft and put in a big gas tank. David rode on that gas tank from the West Coast to India. One of the congregations they worked with in India, and that was roughly 1952 or 53, one of the congregations they worked with over there could not remember and had no record of when that congregation started. Some of the apostles, one of the apostles in particular, went there. Okay, I believe it was Philip. I'll have to go back and double check that. But he was, they couldn't remember when that congregation, they had no record of when it was started or started by whom. And it was assumed by the congregation and by those who went there to evangelize that that congregation was indeed started by one of the apostles of the Lord Jesus Christ in the first century. I think when we look at that kind of stuff, we have to take the Bible at its word. He says it's going to be an everlasting kingdom. And they start talking about it in Genesis, talking about the Christ in Genesis, that he's going to bruise the serpent's head and the serpent's going to bruise his heel. And that's talking directly about my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. And so what I want to do with these 2 nights is just go back and do a broad brush of the church in the Bible and take it up into the first century. And then I don't know where Wayne's going to start. I'm not going to cover everything he's going to cover. That's obvious because I don't have all of his information. And I'm really, really looking forward to him again bringing us up to speed on the congregations of the Lord's church here in this county. I guess the first place I want to go is to 2 Samuel. Start looking there for some stuff. And then 2 Samuel 7, and it'll take me a second to get there. In 12 through 16, it says, "And when thy days be fulfilled, and thou shalt sleep with thy fathers, I will set up thy seed after thee, which shall proceed out of thy bowels, and I will establish his kingdom. I shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever." Samuel can't be writing about King David, okay? I realize that he's the one that put Saul into office. I realize that he helps put David in office as the king. The story of that kingship is diluted. What they really did when they cried, "Give us a king," they were tired of the judges and tired of God being the king of Israel. And the stuff they had gone through, we've been talking about that on Sunday morning in the Sunday morning class, about Exodus and what they went through to get out of Egypt. And they get to the promised land, and they're there about 400 years under judges, and get there in about 1450. Take away about 1410 in all actuality when they wind up getting into Canaan's land itself. So from that point in time, 1410, down to when Saul is installed somewhere around 1050, was a time of judges, and God was in charge of keeping them squared away and putting judges in power. Now, some of the judges are strange and wondrous people, obviously. And I guess the one that really confuses me sometimes is Samson, okay? He's a judge. One of the judges in Israel is Samson, and look at his life. And Betty sometimes has a problem with King David even. And I have a problem with Solomon. I know he's a smart guy, and I know he writes a lot, and I know he has some good things to say and good things to do. But how many wives did he have, and how many concubines? Okay? Yeah, over 1,000 of them, okay? How are you going to keep 1,000 women happy? Well, that wasn't too smart, in my opinion. And so anyway, so this, he cannot be talking about David. Because David dies, doesn't he? And he's buried in Israel. Has to be talking about somebody else. And that somebody else is Jesus Christ. Talking about him he is in the line of David. He is one of the tribe of David. And he's in the grave. And that kingdom doesn't last. That earthly kingdom of David's does not last. And we've been looking sort of at that story on Sunday morning. We haven't gotten around to David, obviously. We've just gotten them out of Egypt for about a month and a half this morning. But they do get into the land of Canaan, and they do inherit that. They do parcel it out by tribes, and finally they get a king. And he and David don't get along, and David gets to be king. David has Solomon as follows him. And Solomon is a pretty good king, but he keeps taxing them. You know that the estimate of the gold that came into Solomon's kingdom in a year's time would fill 5-ton dump trucks that was 5 miles long. I can't imagine that much gold, but that's what historians tell us came into Solomon's kingdom during his time frame, during his reign. After Solomon is Rehoboam and Jeroboam. Rehoboam in Judah and Manasseh. And then in the northern kingdom, there was 10 tribes up there, and they disappeared under Jeroboam. He's the one who builds the 2 golden calves, puts one in Bethel and one in Dan. And if you look on the map where Bethel is not but about 40 miles northwest of Jerusalem. Dan is all the way up by Damascus, Syria. It's at the headwaters of the water that runs in, that's the Jordan River in all actuality, and it runs into the lake at Capernaum. 2 golden calves. So what happens because of that? That's in 931 when Jeroboam takes over the northern tribes over taxation. In 721, those 10 tribes disappear. Now, if you want to read some stories about those 10 tribes, go get you a study Bible that has the what I call the Apocrypha books in it. Tobit, I guess, is the first one, and then you have 1st, 2nd Maccabees, several of those. You can go read those books. And that's basically about the 10 people of the 10 tribes that have been dispersed throughout the Assyrians did that. They dispersed them out to other countries that they were over because they'd conquered them. Sargon II was the guy that takes over those 10 tribes, and he comes down and is going to take Jerusalem. What happens? God kills 185,000 of his troops, and he leaves and don't ever come back. So who's the next guy that comes in to take Judah and Benjamin? Nebuchadnezzar. Now, his daddy was the king of Babylon, and his name was Nabonidus. And Nebuchadnezzar was the chief of his army when he comes through the first time in 605 BC. When he comes through there, he takes Daniel and the elite young people of Judah and takes them with him to Babylon. And that's where Daniel writes the book, isn't it? He writes his book of Daniel in Babylon. Babylon's still there. The city is still there today. It's in present-day Iraq. But it was part of what we'd call the Persian Empire. In fact, the Medo-Persian takes over Babylon under Cyrus the Great. And anyway, but 721, 10 tribes disappeared. There's no keeping up with their heritage. There's no keeping up with families. There's no keeping up with tribes. There's no record of them because they've been dispersed and spread out through all of the countries of what we call the Mideast today. I have a bunch of questions about them folks. They gave them opportunity to come back under the Medo-Persian, Ahasuerus, to come back to Jerusalem and rebuild it, and he furnished the money and all of the stuff to do that. How many came back? When we start reading through Nehemiah, how many came back? 40,000. So that says the descendants of those folks that stayed, and they had come within just one thing of being completely destroyed in the Babylonian Empire, hadn't they? Esther saves the Jews or the Israelites that were in old Babylon, the whole country. Wow. And this has to be something different than David. It's not him. 585, Judah is taken into captivity and taken into Babylon, and they stay there for 70 years. And then they are let come back, and they're never a kingdom after that. There's never a king, and there is never a legitimate, I don't know whether you call it legitimate or not, but there's never a identifiable country at that point that is in power that deals with the rest of the world. When they get out of Babylon, never happens. Become known as Palestine. Up until when? 1948. In our time frame, in our lifetime, Israel is made a nation in our lifetime in 1948 by Harry Truman, right? And they're still a nation now. There's done some misguided business, but regardless of what it was, there is, in fact, a legitimate government. We have an embassy there in the city of Jerusalem now, and it is considered to be a country and a player in world affairs. It wasn't in the time of Christ, and it wasn't in any of the time frame from Babylon in 585 until 1948. Uh, who's in charge of that? Remember, God is in charge. You know, everywhere, all the time. Oh, yeah, we question him. Why would you let Hitler take over Germany? For what reason? The world needed to see what evil looks like on a massive scale. And then people have to act on a massive scale to defeat evil on a massive scale. I could get into World War II and talking about what this country did in that time frame. Do you realize how much stuff this country built and put into the war machine for the Soviet Union and for all our allies, the Brits, the French, and all of them in 3.5 years? Go back and research that and find out. But God's in control. Why did he let them go into Babylonian captivity after being in Egyptian captivity? Why did he let Sargon II take the 10 tribes? Because the 10 tribes were worshiping the golden calf in Dan and in Bethel, and they wouldn't give it up. Remember Christ's conversation with the woman at the well, the Samaritan woman? She says, why? Why do you say we have to worship in Jerusalem and our folks say we have to worship here? And he says, the time's coming when you won't worship in either place. You can worship where you are. Wow. That's Christ. And that's Christ's kingdom. And that's Christ's church. And that's the Christ. In Isaiah, the 2nd chapter, okay, 1 through 3, says, the word that Isaiah the son of Amos saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. And it shall come to pass in the last days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established in the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow into it. Many people shall go and say, come ye, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. And he will teach us his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He's not talking about an earthly kingdom there, is he? No, he's talking about the church. And where's it going to start? We'll get to that just a little bit later, but Christ defines that, where it's supposed to start and where they're supposed to go second, third, and fourth, right? As far as establishing his kingdom and his church in the world. In Daniel, the 2nd chapter, Daniel, 2nd chapter, verse 44. And in the days of these kings shall God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all the kingdoms and shall stand forever. This is in response, Daniel is writing in response to the dream of Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar couldn't find anybody in his kingdom of their descent, Babylonian or Persian, that could tell him what his dream was about. And it was about 5 nations and time frame of last days. And the 5 nations were, one, Babylon, where he was now and who was in charge of basically of all the area around about Babylon. They were the big dog on the block. The next one that comes along is the Medo-Persians, and they take over Babylon, and they take over the Middle East, and they take over Israel. They take over everywhere. In fact, they start the process of rebuilding the city of Jerusalem, the walls and the temple. And they let People that wanted to go and go back to Jerusalem to serve God and be there. The next ones are the Greeks. Remember that the Medo-Persian was going to go defeat the Greeks. Actually, he was after Alexander the Great, maybe. But they were going to go defeat the Greeks, and it didn't work, and they lost. He'd had the big party, remember? And then they went out to do that, but it didn't work. And so they're not the kingdom. And then it's the Roman Empire. Roman Empire comes into existence roughly 150 or 120 BC, and it lasts all the way up to the 400s AD. A long-lasting empire. It did split, and that's the fifth kingdom that's talked about in Nebuchadnezzar's dream. The Roman Empire split into two, the Eastern and the Western. The Western was located still in Rome, and the Eastern was in Constantinople, which is Turkey now. And if you've ever been to the Eastern world, when you go into their church buildings, cathedrals, whatever you want to call it, the walls and the ceiling all have paintings on them. And the reason for that was the majority of the people in the time that those things were built in the first century, or the third century, whenever it took place, Constantine was around 350 AD, and he's the Roman emperor that says it's all right to be a Christian and became one himself and declared that the Christian religion is the religion of the Roman government in Rome. But you go into their cathedrals and look on the ceilings and on the walls, there's a story painted on them. And it's from creation all the way down to Jesus Christ. Okay? Happens in every one of them. They're painted. I haven't been in one yet in anywhere in the old Soviet Union that we've been that didn't happen in the Greek churches. They paint the stories on the walls for those who are uneducated. They look at it and say, now what's this? And they tell them. What's this? And they tell them. We were in Donetsk, Ukraine, and we got in with the priest there at the local Eastern Orthodox congregation. And he came to Hoyt Nelson. I don't know whether any of you know Hoyt or not. He was the preacher over in Moulton for about 25 years. I met him first time in Enterprise, Alabama. First preacher ever came when I was washing the car, and he stopped and helped me wash the car. Made a good impression on me. But Hoyt and I became good friends for a long, long time. But we got to talking to this priest there, and he says, well, what about this baptism thing y'all teach? We should be glad to explain it. Sit down and get your Bible. He said, I want you to come to our congregation on Sunday morning and teach that. We went and taught that. The Eastern Orthodox Church. It had it on the wall. They weren't following it. They weren't following what was on their wall. Anyway, in the last days is going to be during the divided kingdom, okay, of the Roman Empire. And it's described in his dream of iron and clay and feet. It's what this divided kingdom of the Roman Empire is talking about. And he says it's in the last days, the God of heaven is going to set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed. So that's one we can write down. God promises that the kingdom is going to be on this earth until the earth is no more. It's going to be forever. Jesus is King of kings and Lord of lords right now. Right now. He's sitting on the right hand of God. God has made him the king. The king. And we're in those last days. There's not going to be another dispensation from God the Father and God the Son for mankind on this earth. It's been in existence since 33 AD in Jerusalem. And he's the king in it, and we're in his kingdom. And heaven is going to be his kingdom brought home. And we are going to be there. Guaranteed. Assured. We sing Blessed Assurance, Jesus is mine. Oh, what a foretaste of glory divine. I would lead that in singing, but I can't. I don't have my bucket with the lid on it. I can't carry a tune. But we sing that song. And where do we get that from? We get that from this book, that Jesus is the King, and he's assured us that if we do what he says, he's going to come back and get us and bring us to where he is. And it's not going to be 1,000 years wait, okay? Not going to be. He's not coming back for 1,000 years. He's had enough of this earth and how it treated him. He gave his life for man's sin for all time, from Adam to the last person that ever gets born in this world. Their sin is covered if they do what he says. And here's Isaiah writing about it. And Isaiah does a beautiful job with Isaiah 53, 52 and 53, talking about you're not going to recognize him. And they didn't. He was right. He was right. When Isaiah writes about he's going to be, not going to be the king, he's going to be the servant, and he's going to be killed for man's sin. They didn't recognize him when he came. What were they looking for? They were looking for King David, what they were looking for. And he didn't come for that. He came to serve. And he came to die for man's sin. We'll start there next week. Thank you for your attention.